Tonight, the Jesus Revolution descends on Capitol Hill.
Our country is a dark and divided place, but now there's hope, and it's spreading.
Washington lawmakers invited to join a special screening of one of America's greatest spiritual awakenings. Plus, the humanitarian crisis on the border.
Because we have a humanitarian obligation to cut the smugglers out.
Security plans from both sides of the aisle working to reform immigration law before the end of Trump-era restrictions. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A taste of revival in the halls of Congress. Welcome to Faith Nation from our Washington News Bureau. I'm John Jessup. Well, revival landing at one of the most unlikely places and audiences. Washington lawmakers got the chance to see or screen the surprise hit Jesus Revolution on Capitol Hill. CBN's Matt Galka was on hand and has the latest on the film making ripples in theaters, homes, and now the U.S. Capitol.
Our country is a dark and divided place, but now there's hope, and it's spreading.
The words from the film Jesus Revolution echoed through the Longworth building on Capitol Hill. The real-life stars of the movie about the movement that turned hippies onto Jesus in the 1970s invited lawmakers and staffers for a viewing, sponsored by CBN and Hope to the Hill Ministries.
For me, it's about the staff, too, mostly because this film talks about a time when young people changed the world. And God has often used young people, and so you know this, and many people understand that work around Washington, D.C., that young people run this country. 25-year-olds and under are the ones that are the staffers here on the Hill. And I believe that if God can get a hold of their hearts, it's amazing what he can do with people that are wholly given to him.
Kelsey Grammer plays Pastor Chuck Smith, who welcomed young people to his Calvary Chapel in California.
It doesn't get old because I like to watch it with other people.
Harvest Christian Fellowship pastor Greg Laurie and his wife Kathy found themselves as part of the revolution.
This is a fresh story, and I think there's a lot of parallels between the Jesus Revolution days, i.e. early 70s, and today. So many parallels, so many similar problems that we were having back then that we're having now in an amplified way. So I think this message is really relevant for this moment in time.
The movie's message of revival resonated with members of Congress in attendance.
For those of us who serve on Capitol Hill, who are followers of Jesus, that are praying for a move of God again in our land, it's wonderful to be able to have this movie come and share about when it happened before and to plant those seeds and stir hearts.
I think it's super encouraging for us. It gives us hope for our country. I mean, obviously we're in the political realm, but the real solution is spiritual. The solution for our country, not political.
Jesus Revolution made more than $50 million at the box office with a budget of just around $15 million. And even though it was a big success, Pastor Greg says there are no plans for a sequel yet. At the Capitol, Matt Galka, CBN News.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks, Matt. Well, the United States is preparing for an influx of migrants as Trump-era immigration restrictions, known as Title 42, wind down. And now Republicans in the White House have competing plans to prevent tens of thousands of monthly illegal crossings, including unaccompanied minors. Gary Lane has more.
350,000 unaccompanied children have come into the United States within the past 2 years, and a recent bombshell investigation from the New York Times found that many of them are being put to work right here in the United States in violation of child labor laws. This week, Domestic Policy Council Director Susan Rice submitted her resignation after repeatedly warning that the Biden administration's open-door policy is enticing parents to separate from their migrant children and send them across the border unaccompanied. Laura Reese is the former Deputy Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security.
Yes, that's how the left designed it. It is perverse. It is exploitation. And there is no reason the left should be able to defend this policy.
House Republicans say Homeland Security is unable to account for at least 85,000 migrant children. They've developed a border security plan to stop the illegal flow of the unaccompanied children and thousands of other migrants over the southern U.S. border, as they blamed the Biden administration for the surge at the border.
Day one, they said, no more wall, no more remain in Mexico. You get to our country, you're going to be released somewhere into the country. So we put together what we believe is the strongest immigration enforcement legislation ever.
The GOP plan would revive some Trump-era policies, including hiring more border agents, tightening asylum requirements, and finishing border wall construction. But Democrats say the Republican proposal is pure political theater, and DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas insists the U.S. southern border is secure. With Title 42 restrictions that let the government quickly expel migrants set to end May 11th, the Biden administration announced their plan to reduce illegal border crossings. They're proposing setting up of migrant processing centers, possibly in Guatemala and Colombia. The idea is to screen and evaluate asylum seekers before they make the long, dangerous journey to the U.S.
This is particularly important because we have a humanitarian obligation to cut the smugglers out.
And get ready. With the 2024 primary season coming up quickly, many of the announced presidential candidates are promising to make immigration a top issue of their political campaigns. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Speaking of the election cycle, another GOP candidate officially enters the 2024 White House race, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. He spoke with CBN chief political analyst David Brody as the field for the Republican primary nomination begins to take shape.
Can I ask you a straight-up question? Is part of the reason that you're getting in to say we can't have Donald Trump in the White House again as a party? Is that part of what's going on here?
Sure, there's a factor there, but let me explain it. First of all, the biggest motivation is that the Biden policies are taking us the wrong direction.
Number one, right. Got it.
But also, our party, GOP, needs a course correction, and that the GOP, I don't believe, can win in a November election with Donald Trump leading the pack. And I also look at, I supported him in 2020. I was on his team because I looked at the choices and I thought he would lead us in the right direction, but something happened and we went down a dark path after the election.
Is that something January 6th? Did that change?
January 6th, sure. I think that was a big factor in it, not just what happened on January 6th, but what led up to that. The hallmark of our democracy, one of them is that we have a peaceful transfer of power. And, I've seen tough elections. Nobody likes to lose. But to not be able to have the grace and dignity to say America is more important than my personal vendettas or crisis, that's what our democracy is about.
How do you reconcile, and it's not just you but others who don't want to see Donald Trump back in the White House, but if you just strip Trump away for just a second and maybe some of the personality and some of the policies and what he accomplished in those 4 years, you support him in 2020, were actually very good for America according to most conservatives. So how do you delineate the difference and not be able to just say, hey, you know what, his policies were good, let's continue that?
Great point, and I do believe that it's about how you lead and whether by your leadership style you're going to lift up America or divide us again. But there's also substance there. And I could go through a litany of list as to things that he did well. I love the support that he gave to Israel, the Abraham Accords, very supportive of moving the capital. I like the fact that, we had some tax cuts during that time. But I also think he's unique in terms of his policies. And I remember during the pandemic, I was governor, and we were looking at a stimulus package, and he was telling the Democrats, spend more, and telling the Republicans. And spending has led to our national debt of $31 trillion, and it's responsive of both Democrat and Republican administrations. And so there's, some differences. I also look at our support of Israel. I look at our support of Ukraine. And, he tends toward more of an isolationist approach to America. And I believe that we've been blessed by God and that our freedoms are unique and that we can set an example of liberty for the world and that we haven't done that effectively lately. And we should not abandon our allies. We should not leave freedom in the streets of Kiev let's support those who stand with us.
Well, let's now turn to Julia Manchester, national politics reporter for The Hill. Julia, we just saw David's interview with Governor Hutchinson. He believes the GOP needs a course correction, essentially, and he doesn't think the party can win the White House with former President Trump as the nominee. Your thoughts on his assessment?
Yeah, look, ASA Hutchinson is very much trying to carve out his own lane. He says it isn't the never Trump lane, but the non-Trump lane. And in doing that, he's hoping to get back to what he and his allies say are classic conservatism, or, you know, sort of the establishment, old school Republican, talking about limited government, higher defense spending, you know, getting back to the social conservative roots of the party, you know, talking about some of these cultural issues, but maybe not going the same way that we've seen Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis go on these issues. So he's trying to carve out this own lane in an effort to appeal to a broader variety of voters in a general election. The problem is he's barely polling at 1%. I don't even think he's reaching 1% in a number of GOP primary polls. And we know that Republican primary voters seem to be very much in line with Trump. And if they aren't, it's Ron DeSantis at a distant second place. So, you know, Hutchinson on paper is a good candidate, but in a general election, maybe. But when it comes to the GOP primary, that's a tough hill for him to climb.
And I wonder if many people will make that distinction that you just noted between non-Trump and never Trump. You know, there's a pair of pro-life measures that were designed to limit abortion that went down in two deep red states, South Carolina and Nebraska. Those measures were put forward by Republicans, but also defeated by a faction within their own ranks. Julia, what does that spell for conservatives in the next election cycle if they can't even agree on a strategy or limits when it comes to abortion and abortion bans?
Yeah, I think it spells trouble for them. But I think those Republicans who voted against those measures and went against their party on it are essentially realizing that Republicans and conservatives are continuing to lose and get pummeled on abortion really across the country ever since Roe v. Wade was overturned. I think a lot of Republicans thought, OK, since it's been overturned at the federal level, it'll go back to the state. That's kind of the end of what we won't hear about it as much in, you know, the political realm and in terms of campaigns. But it's actually been a tool really to galvanize Democratic voters and sway a number of independent and swing voters in major battleground states. So I think you're starting to see Republicans realize that some of these really strict measures of restricting abortion at the state level aren't as popular as they once thought they were. That being said, though, you are hearing a lot of Republicans, including Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, say that Republicans need to choose a message, stick with it, and go on the offense on the abortion. And through doing that, they say they need to paint their Democratic opponents as extreme on the issue and talk about late-term abortion, for example. So we'll see if that works. But right now, you're right, it's certainly divided on the issue.
All right, Julia Manchester of The Hill, thank you so much for your time and have a great weekend.
You too.
Well, coming up, backlash after a military hospital mysteriously issued a cease and desist order to Catholic priests ministering to veterans. The story behind why after this. Welcome back. Morally wrong and a First Amendment violation. That's how critics have characterized a cease and desist order issued to Catholic priests to stop ministering to veterans during Holy Week. A prominent Catholic archbishop and Republican lawmakers are speaking out after Walter Reed Military Hospital abruptly terminated the contract of a group of Franciscan priests who had provided pastoral care to veterans for 20 years. The Archdiocese for the Military Services is accusing the hospital of violating the rights of hospitalized Catholics. For its part, Walter Reed says Catholic services continue at the hospital. Well, here with us now is Mike Berry, Director of Military Affairs at the First Liberty Institute. Michael, welcome to you. The change came right before Easter. Walter Reed says it notified the Franciscans in March that their contract would be renewed. Hospitals and certainly the government typically cancel or change contracts with providers. That's not uncommon. So in this case, though, they're shifting services for Catholic pastoral care to a secular defense contractor. So, Mike, how and why is this different?
Well, the most important part of the story is that this is Walter Reed, right? This is where a lot of our nation's wounded warriors are going to recover and to recuperate. And many of those are people of Catholic faith. And they have a constitutional right to enjoy the free exercise of their religious beliefs and to have religious services and sacraments provided to them by Catholic clergy. And that's, just as you said, that's been going on for decades via a Franciscan friary. So that's basically a seminary that's located right next to Walter Reed. And the reason for that is that the military doesn't have enough active duty Catholic chaplains to fill the need that they have. And so they backfill that by contracting with the archdiocese. And for decades, that wasn't an issue. But now you have a for-profit secular defense contractor that came in and underbid on this contract. So meaning they basically offered, $1 less so that they could win the contract. But the problem is they're a for-profit secular business. They're a defense contractor. They are not under the authority or the auspices of the Catholic Church, so they cannot provide Catholic services in the same way that a Franciscan friary can, because the Franciscans are under the authority of the Catholic Church. So this is actually depriving Catholic service members, again, wounded warriors, people who are at Walter Reed recovering from their injuries or from illnesses, and this is depriving them of their constitutional guarantee of free exercise of religion. And as you mentioned, this happened during Holy Week, the holiest week in the Christian calendar, which just adds insult to injury.
So, Mike, I want to get in another question for you. Some 24 Republican lawmakers demanded an answer from the Pentagon. What's been the response?
Well, First Liberty Institute joined those Republican lawmakers, and we sent a letter as well to the Pentagon explaining to them the constitutional violations and how this is harming our military. And to my knowledge, the only response the Pentagon has given is, thank you for your correspondence. We're going to look into this, which is effectively a non-responsive response.
So, in your estimation, was this simply a financial decision, or do you think there's something more sinister that lies at heart?
I certainly hope it was just an oversight, that somebody didn't understand that if you're a Catholic, the only people that you can receive sacraments from is a member of the Catholic clergy, a priest. Right. And that perhaps they just didn't understand that and thought, oh, we can just give the contract to whomever, and this person happens to be a lower bidder, so we can give it to them. And if there's anything sinister going on, then somebody needs to be held accountable because that's, again, not only is it inappropriate, not only is it morally wrong, but it's legally wrong.
All right, Mike, we're going to have to let that be the final word, and we'll keep track with you. Mike Berry with the First Liberty Institute, thank you so much, and we'll be back right after the break. Welcome back. Ukrainians are mourning the deaths of more than 20 people after one of the deadliest airstrikes in months. Russians fired more than 20 cruise missiles at cities across the war-torn country, killing innocent people as they slept early this morning and leaving many survivors trapped under the rubble. The Ukrainian capital of Kyiv was struck for the first time in more than 50 days. Well, even as the state of Israel faces internal domestic strife, a major spiritual effort is uniting thousands of ministries around the world to join forces and pray for Israel. As CBN's Chris Mitchell reports, the historic initiative is based on the biblical significance of Israel's capital, Jerusalem.
Mike Bickle of the International House of Prayer in Kansas City explains how this call to intercede for Israel began.
We began a call on March 7th, about 6 weeks ago. And the call, in essence, was to call 1 million people to pray 1 hour a day for Jerusalem for 21 days.
It begins May 7th and runs through the 28th. Bickle says the response to this call has now gone viral and global.
Well, it's blown up on us, and we did not understand that. We quit counting at the 1 million mark about April 1st, at the 3 weeks after giving this call. And there's thousands of ministries participating in this at this point in time. I'm guessing well over 5 million will participate.
A website, Isaiah62fast.com, not an International House of Prayer website, has been set up as a place where ministries from around the world can provide their information so people can find a participating ministry in their region.
We want to inspire and be catalytic in an escalation of the global conversation of the biblical narrative for Israel. So we're going lots of ministries talking to lots of new people about it. And we have right now 100 languages this is translated in.
The scripture chosen to focus on during the time of prayer is Isaiah chapter 62.
It's 12 verses, line upon line, glory of God for Jerusalem. I don't know of any other chapter that has more divine information about God's purpose for Jerusalem than Isaiah 62.
Bickle expects this fast will accelerate global prayer for Jerusalem.
But let's go forward a year from now, 2 years from now. Those 5 or 10 million people, they all have 2 or 3 friends. So a year from now, there'll be 20, 30, 40, 50 million people in this conversation about the biblical narrative for Israel.
Bickle believes that number may eventually grow to as many as 100 million Christians praying for Israel. The initiative will culminate here on the southern steps of the Temple Mount on the day of Pentecost, May 28th. Bickle says with the unprecedented divisions within Israel right now and the looming threat of a nuclear Iran, he sees this as a for such a time as this moment, an opportunity for the church worldwide to stand in the gap for Israel, as Queen Esther did thousands of years ago for the Jewish people. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Southern Steps, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Jumping into action to save everyone aboard a school bus. Meet the kid being hailed a hero next. And finally tonight, fast thinking by a 7th grader who helped save the day in Michigan. Dillian Reeves was riding the school bus when the bus driver had a medical emergency. The driver radioed for help but passed out before she could pull over. That's when Dillian jumped into action, taking control of the steering wheel while also bringing the bus to a stop.
This was an extraordinary act of courage and maturity on his part. He had the wherewithal to push it slowly, likely in anticipation that the bus was full of passengers.
Dillian says he knew what to do in the situation because he watches the bus driver do it every day. The city will soon be awarding the middle schooler a special commendation for his heroic actions, and hopefully he also gets a license out of that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on Monday.